I'm Khodani Mulaudzi, and I'm going to be your moderator for the day. The session is going to be on sustainable regional industrial development, and we've got an exciting panel ahead of us. Starting off, we'll have Dr. Mamadou, who's going to speak to us on carbon dioxide emissions, energy consumption, and industrial transformation in Southern Africa and the development community. Then we'll move on to Glen Robbins, who will speak to us on the prospect of regional value chain in the wind energy sector and the role of South African industrial policy. Then lastly, we'll have Dr. Ronett Atukunda on strategy formulation, implementation in Africa, the case for leather value chains in selected COMESA, EAC, and SADC countries. So the format for this session will be in the following way. We'll have 3 presentations from our panelists. Each presentation will be about 15 minutes each. And then after the presentation, we'll move on to the Q&A session. So for the Q&A session, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to post all your questions. And then after that, we will go on to a live session where you can unmute your mic and ask questions, but please use the Q&A button. So starting up, we'll be opening up for Dr. Mamadou. Welcome, Dr. Mamadou.
Oh, welcome. Thank you, Khodani, and good morning to all the participants. I would like to thank you for this participation to this conference online. And firstly, I want to say that this presentation, this study have been done by 3 colleagues, Alex, Farai, and me. And there is just one thing to underline at the beginning. We have changed only the title of the paper. It is now Carbon Dioxide Emission, Energy Intensity, and Industrial Transformation. For the presentation today, we have the follow outline. We will try to give some background of the study, followed by an overview of the carbon dioxide and industrialization and in SADC countries. This will be followed by the methodology and the empirical result. We will conclude by the recommendations. As background, what we can say that the SADC community are facing some challenges. These include extreme poverty and underdevelopment. It is estimated that half of the population are living with less than $1.9, and this region also are facing some external shocks, as there are some shock on the economic performance of these countries. What is argued in the literature that it is that industrialization is a mean which can be used to achieve sustainable development, as it can help to improve economic activity, increase employment, and it can help also to improve living standard of people, and then this can help to reduce poverty. However, what is also known is that you can't industrialize without increasing the use of energy, and this will increase carbon dioxide emission, and this will have an impact in climate change and in global warming. And global warming is a big challenge in nowadays, and it is the global warming have called for the need to introduce some policies to protect the environment and to mitigate its negative effects. Nowadays, there is a great challenge for SADC's country members, as this challenge include how to combine structural transformation, which is a need, and inclusive growth, and how to protect how the environment could be sustained. So The objective of this study is to understand the intricate relationship between carbon dioxide emission, energy intensity, and industrialization in SADC countries. The motivation of this study include the fact that the SADC bloc have will be one of the greatest they will increase its energy use, and it will increase also carbon dioxide emission as it it is this block should industrialize because industrialization is needed as we have underlined above. So it is also motivated that this study could help the policymaker to have some insight on the link on this variable, meaning the relationship between carbon dioxide and industrialization. First of all, we want to present some overview of the trend of industrialization and carbon dioxide in the SADC countries. In this figure, the figure one, we present the industry value added relative to GDP trend. First of all, what we can see here is that globally the share of industry value added to GDP in SADC country members has decreased between 1990 to 2014. Uh, we have only two countries which are including Tanzania and DRC which have seen the ratio of industry value added to GDP which has increased. The other countries have seen the ratio of industry value added to GDP decrease. We we have thirdly, what we can see is that we have Angola, Botswana, Zambia, DRC, and South Africa. They have the highest ratio of industry value added over this period. In this second figure, we have the carbon dioxide emission per capita trend over the period inside the country. What we can see here is that uh, we see a positive trend of carbon dioxide emission over this period. And South Africa is the most polluter in this region, followed by Seychelles, Mauritius, and Botswana. Thirdly, what we can see also is that the trend of carbon dioxide emission have a positive trend over this period. In this figure, we just plot the scatter point between industry value added and carbon dioxide emission to see what a first correlation which can exist between carbon dioxide and industrialization over this period. What we can see, we have a positive plot, a positive correlation between these two variables, and we can see that the countries such as South Africa, Angola, Botswana, and DRC, which have the higher ratio of industry value added, are the most polluter in this region. However, this correlation doesn't mean it is not a causality. So we will see what kind of causality we can exist between this variable in the next section. For this study, we use some. It is an empirical study, so we have some econometric model what we have done, and all the data used in the study are from the database of the World Bank, particularly the World Development Indicators. We have we have we have used 13 countries from SADC, excluding Madagascar, Lesotho, and Eswatini, because there's three countries lack of data or of our variable for our variable, and the model specification, we have two equations linking carbon dioxide and some and its explanatory variable. Carbon dioxide is a dependent variable as explanatory and dependent, and the control variable include GDP per capita, population, energy intensity, and industrialization. And in this model, we have two. The equation one link present the direct effect of industrialization and energy intensity, which are our variable of interest, while the second variable present the indirect effects of industrialization and energy intensity. And in this second equation, we add an interaction variable between industrialization and energy intensity to see that how the industrialization and energy intensity can be linked to have an effect on carbon dioxide. For the estimation, the method which have been privileged in the study are the GMM, and we use OLS, fixed effect and random effect for robustness of our estimation. One thing, all the variables have been taken in natural logarithmic so that the coefficient, the interpretation, the coefficient will be used as elasticity or empirical result. First of all, what we can say that our result are our result our results are consistent both in the econometric side and in the economic side. From the econometric side, we have used the GMM system, and for the validity of the GMM, first of all, we have to test the validity of the instrument and the second order autocorrelation. For the validity of the instrument, we have used both the Sagan test and the Hansen test for the validity of the instrument can provide some satisfactory, as they didn't uh, reject the validity of the instrument. And the second order of autocorrelation also are valid. So in the economic side, we all the coefficient of the variable used here have the expected value, the expected value. For instance, we can see that for the control variable for the control variable GDP per capita and population, all the coefficients are positive. And what that is the what is expected in the literature review. In this table, we have two kind of result. In the first one, the estimation are presented without the interaction variable, while the second is done with interaction variable. For the first one, we can see that the industrialization have a positive coefficient, meaning that industrialization have a positive and significant effect in carbon dioxide emission in SADC countries, which can be which was expected. However, for the energy intensity, the coefficient is positive, but it is non-significant. Uh, in the second, when we add the interaction variable, we see that all the control variable, meaning GDP per capita and population, have the expected value, and they are significant. Uh, Going to our variable of interest, we see that the industrialization have a positive value and the energy intensity have a positive value also. But the interaction variable have a negative value, meaning that uh, the energy intensity can some way dampen the negative effect of the industrialization on dioxide carbon emission. So from this result, we can do the following recommendation. Uh, we we think that SADC country members should continue the process of industrialization because this is a necessity for a sustainable development. Also, they should promote to reduce their dependence on fossil energy. This can be through promoting mixed energy by using renewable energies like wind and solar. They should also invest in energy efficiency to reduce the detrimental effect on the environmental. Also, this country should target environmental friendly energy generating projects. Oh, thank you.
Also be sharing your presentation.
Thanks for a great lead-in, Mamadou. You raised a number of issues that were very sort of pertinent in our thinking in this project. I'm going to be reporting on some work that I did with some colleagues from Denmark and from UCT, looking at the experience of South Africa's wind energy sector. Our project had a number of sort of focus areas, and I'm only going to be talking about the one. We looked at some of the community development features of the wind energy part of the renewable energy program in South Africa. We looked at some of the dynamics of the design of the scheme to procure energy, and we looked at the industrialization dynamics, and that was the aspect that we're talking about. And there is in process a number of papers that are coming out of that, and I'm happy to share some information about those at the end. South Africa's wind energy journey came out of obviously this sort of global push for the need to tackle growing environmental challenges relating to fossil fuels that Mamadou mentioned, but also it coincided with South Africa increasingly encountering problems in its own energy supply. If you recall pre-World Cup, some of the load shedding that we began to encounter. In 2010, the country approved the Integrated Resource Plan, which proposed the sort of energy mix over a 20-year period, and aimed for 17,000 megawatts of electricity from renewable energy sources by 2030. And in 2011, shortly thereafter, the country launched its first renewable energy bid round under the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, referred to now as REAP. And REAP had 4 bid rounds initiated between 2011 and 2015, and then the sort of last part of the 4th round was awarded in 2018. In 2015, South Africa had the 5th largest wind energy and renewable energy program globally. And by 2020, the country has 33 wind farms, over 1,000 turbines, and some significant installed capacity. The renewable energy program also had large solar and concentrated solar elements to it. And in 2019, last year, we produced another integrated resource plan, which also committed to 18% of the projected total of new energy to be coming from renewable sources. Alongside this process of energy reform, we had what one could call the sort of greening of South Africa's industrial policy. And this went through a couple of sort of policy phases. We had a Green Economy Summit. Some of those commitments were confirmed in the new growth path, where along the way, this idea of moving to a greener kind of industry was emphasized, including issues of efficiency and the like. Confirmed again in the National Development Plan in 2030, as well as in our industrial policy action plans. And I've just taken from two of them here, but back in 2011, the then Minister spoke about the importance of a green economy thrust in building sort of sustainable manufacturing base in the country. The REAP program was understood as being an instrument of industrial policy, in that one of the conditions that the bidders to be able to provide energy into the program had to meet was that of local content. And local content was one of a number of criteria that was introduced into the REAP. Wasn't necessarily the most significant, but over time it's important to appreciate that as the program developed, the minimum requirements for local content were raised, and that saw the country shifting from mostly a kind of services-driven local content delivery to including the delivery of some manufactured components into the wind energy sector. This just gives you a sort of schematic of the global value chain that applies in the wind energy sector. And the sort of green circles reflect areas where there was significant localization. And the orange area, which is really about the components utilized by the big producers of wind energy turbines, is an area where there was only some preliminary and sort of first steps towards localization. And the most significant component of that was towers. Obviously, the program was curtailed and sort of brought to a premature end, just at the point where some of the prospects for deeper industrialization were being developed. Nonetheless, even the DTI reported it began to have very significant impacts in the local economy. We looked at some of the sort of shortcomings of the South African program, and two sort of dimensions of that we were looked at, drawn from many dozens of interviews with different industry players. The first was around industrial policy and design and delivery. And I think what was clear was, despite a huge number of kind of policy commitments towards some form of green industrialization, in practice, if we look at the nature of the industrial policy instruments that were there, one could say that perhaps lip service was being paid towards green industrialization. There wasn't any serious customized industrial policy instrument. In fact, industrial policy issues were lost in a whole range of other commitments that were being made at the time and weren't necessarily given priority. And there were also some sort of wasted efforts in attempts to build a sort of a local version of some of the global multinational suppliers. And it wasn't only the curtailment of the REAP program that ended those, but also some failures in thinking that it would be easy for these firms to enter the global value chain. And then obviously in energy policy, the disruption of the REAP caused havoc in what was very much a sort of the early stages of a developing program. And the ongoing delays in policy walkbacks have sort of completely damaged the predictability and continuity of the REAP program, and thus its ability to impact industrialization. And we're still in that situation as we are today. So what then about the SADC region? And just a few reflections. We're planning to do a bit more work on this, but I mean, we know already that the region has massive energy access challenges facing most of the SADC countries. Energy access across SADC sits at around 48%, but is as low as 11% in Malawi. Many countries still have a very substantial focus. In fact, the bulk of their focus is on coal, hydro, or gas projects in national energy plans. A lot of these coal options are linked to mineral rights exchange deals. For example, in Tanzania, some of the largest hydro plans remain or underfunded and face many complexities, including environmental. And the gas development schemes might end up primarily serving markets of project funders and not necessarily have a huge impact on local markets. It's still to be seen what's going to transpire there. But there are a growing array of renewable energy projects. And interestingly, in the design of the South African renewable energy program, in terms of the local content, a lot of the advice that the DTI received at the time was that building a strong connection with SADC and building a sort of a regional plan around renewable energy was essential to even the South African efforts. We know that the region has some of the best rated performance conditions for both solar and onshore wind, particularly solar, but a number of countries or regions in countries have very strong performance dynamics around wind energy too. We also know that there's inter-country infrastructure provided through the South African Power Pool that allows for some innovative renewable energy cross-border supply arrangements. We also see that industry-specific renewable energy schemes are being explored. So mines or industrial plants are looking to develop their own renewable energy schemes to support their industrial processes. And alongside that, there's been ongoing reform of energy policies, slowly improving the sort of framework for renewable energy investments, and the growing affordability of off-grid and microgrid schemes that are likely to drive up some demand. That said, despite this demand, there's still not a huge amount of activity around the renewable energy space. But there are countries with programs in renewable energy, including wind energy. Some of those have gone into full project delivery, and some are still on the plans. And the variation across countries is quite striking. With Namibia committing to 70% renewable energy by 2030, and Tanzania 5% by the same year. And obviously, this commitment in the SADC region has also been impacted a bit by South Africa's own stalling of its program. It's had a big impact in knocking confidence of scheme developers in the region. So just to kind of conclude, what might be the prospects for mutual benefits in SADC? We know whilst the rest of SADC manufacturing in the wind energy value chain prospects are quite limited, adding even muted wind energy demand to South Africa's RFP demand for renewable energy could support South African industrialization and have benefits in terms of a thriving multi-country tradable services capability. One of the really striking things about the South African program, and something that's somewhat underreported, has been how we've developed an exportable sort of tradable services capability in wind and solar energy, but particularly in wind. In fact, as we speak, there's South African technicians working on Northern European wind energy projects. Options exist for innovative bilateral deals between South Africa and SADC countries. We could look at exploring investment support for renewable energy programs in exchange for renewable energy component and services input supply agreements. These have been looked at previously and are being investigated by a number of the players, both public and private sector. And the free trade agreement, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, will enhance the prospects for wind energy value chain trading between South African countries. Already there are a number of countries that have quite significant commitments in wind energy, even if it's just on paper. We've got Morocco, which has already had a number of component supply plants established to support its wind energy programs, but also Kenya, Ethiopia, and others. But without consistent renewable energy policy and implementation in South Africa, informed by a more substantive green industrialization policy, we really think that these prospects will be undermined. So South Africa's really got a key role to play here in order to enable the program globally and across the continent. And finally, just to say, if anyone would like further information on our project, you're welcome to search for the Tentrons project on Google, and there's a link there at the end of the internet, and I'll post it on the discussion forum just now. Thank you very much.
We'll be moving on to a presentation by Nicholas Mudungwe. Earlier on, I said it was going to be by Dr. Ronett Atukunda, but we'll be having Nicholas Mudungwe. So he'll be presenting on strategy formulation and implementation in Africa, looking at the case of leather value chains in selected regional area communities. Welcome, Nicholas.
Good morning, Khodani. First and foremost, I want to thank TWIMS for organizing this forum. I last presented a paper in 2002, and I still had a lot of energy. Now I'm a bit old. 20 years after, I'm very old. But I also want to thank my co-author, Dr. Ronett Atukunda, and also to congratulate her. She got a PhD on 30 July, so it's still very, very fresh. So our presentation, we are going to share experiences in the development and implementation of leather value chains, which I think can also apply to other commodities. I've started by sharing a picture on the screen, which shows a pile of hides and skins on top and nice leather products below. The challenge that we are facing as a continent or within the three RECs is that the majority of countries are exporting in raw state without adding value. And this is a big challenge because we are losing opportunities to create jobs in the region and income and foreign currency, which we badly need for the region. My presentation will start by why should Africa industrialize, overview of the leather value chain, supply and demand potential to transform the leather value chain in Africa, importance on the design, implementation, and challenges of strategies and policies, practical steps to improve strategy implementation, then conclusion. We are using the word strategies and policies interchangeably, but okay, the focus was more on strategies. And the focus of the discussion will be more to say, how can we improve implementation? Because I think Africa, we have done extremely well in terms of designing industrial policies, industrial strategies, but most of them are gathering dust in the various shelves in big offices. So the challenge is how can we move forward as a continent or as RECs in implementing these strategies? We are using our experience working with the leather value chain. Okay, we need to industrialize because already we have the resource base. And we think if we add value, we can address some of the challenges the continent is facing. And we see industrialization, to create jobs. For instance, it will create more opportunities. If we export raw hides, the economic activity will start from the slaughter of the animal, loading the money truck to the port and off they go. But if we add value within the same country or within the region, we'll slaughter the animal, create jobs, load the money truck, create jobs, deliver them to a tannery, they are processed. to finished leather, then from finished leather to leather products. So we find that we'll create jobs along the chain and associated industries. Associated industry, I mean chemical industries, we need to bring in chemicals, water industry, energy. So by industrializing, we'll be able to create those opportunities. And finally, we all know that prices for manufactured products are more stable than the prices of commodities, which have a high level of volatility. So if we industrialize, we'll create opportunities of reducing that volatility. So this is a quick view of the leather value chain. They are pre-slaughter, this is the time when the animal is being kept. Then peri-slaughter, the time of slaughtering, marketing, tanning, then production of leather products. If we look at the value addition process, if we start here with one hide with $100, if we finish 2 leather products, the value will increase 12-fold. So end up with $1,200. So if we export as a hide, it means automatically we are losing more than $1,000. So if you multiply by the number of skins that are being produced in SADC, COMESA, and East African community, and they are being exported raw state, you see that the region may be losing in excess of $1.5 to $2 billion per annum. So the effort is to try to ensure that we add value so that we create jobs in the region. Why should we create value? If you look at the supply side, we have more animals, more skins, but when we move on to value-added products like leather, we are only contributing 6% to global trade, as COMESA, EAC, and SADC. Footwear, we're only contributing to 3.5. So we are exporting raw hides, and consequently, we are losing value. The argument on the other side has been that Africa, there's no demand for footwear. So it's low. So why should we waste our time producing footwear? Let us export and then we import. But if you look at this graph, the demand for footwear is also rising. SADC alone per annum is now exceeding $1.6 billion, importing almost 70 to 80% of the footwear from China. So if we look at Africa, the number is in excess of 3.54 billion imports of footwear, which could have been manufactured in Africa. We are not saying we would be manufactured 100%, but if we can reach 60, 70%, like basic footwear for school shoes, for military, for security, industrial use, which are not stylish, but we are putting even our armies at risk by importing footwear from other countries. Why not make those within Africa and create jobs? So when you look at the supply, we have the raw material, the demand for footwear is rising. Many years ago, when Bata Footwear Company wanted to set up in Africa, they sent marketing people to Africa. They went back to their boss and said, there's no market in Africa because people are walking barefooted. The boss said, I'm going to fire you because if people are barefooted, it means there's demand. So if people are barefooted, it means there's demand for the product. And we can see in Africa, the demand for footwear is rising. So we need to produce our own shoes, we need to produce our own style, which fits our structure and the type of fit that we have in Africa. What are the challenges? The challenge that we've seen on the design and implementation is that we talk of value chains in Africa, but I think our chains are broken. We used to have value chains before liberalization. We used to have institutions that were creating linkages between suppliers of inputs, producers, traders, up to value addition. You know, the era of marketing boards, they were assisting a lot, but they were taken out without finding a suitable replacement. Consequently, we now have broken chains. We can slaughter animals, but there are no tanneries to process. Most of them, they've closed it down. We can grow cotton, but the buyers of cotton are not there. As a result, farmers lose money and they leave the chain. So now we have broken chains because the government, the private sector, the academia are not working together. So to design a strategy that will deliver results, there's always a need for collaboration amongst those stakeholders. Also, there's a misplaced belief that all solutions for Africa will come from elsewhere. I think we should exchange ideas in Africa and learn from others, but not take answers from abroad. We need as Africans to start to discuss issues on our own, just like at this forum, create solutions, experiment with them, make mistakes, and move forward. There's also limited trust between the public and the private sector. So if there's no trust, you design a strategy in the public sector and the private sector do not believe in it, it means the strategy will never give you the good results. The other thing that we have seen is that incentives that are given to external players are better than those for local. So if you set a minimum threshold of saying investment of 1 million, you get tax holidays. So it means for local investors who cannot reach that 1 million, they don't get tax holidays and they are taxed. So how can we grow our SMEs? So this is another challenge that we've observed in our experience. The dilemma, how far should the government go in supporting the industrialization process? Should the government put money? Should the government provide skills? Should the government start greenfield projects, work on them, then sell them to the private sector when they reach maturity? These are questions that we need to consider and discuss. So the biggest challenge is, how do we implement strategies or how do we implement policies after they are designed? This is the area that we are going to discuss in detail. So the design, as I said, it has its own problems, but the biggest challenge is associated with the implementation. That's where we find a lot of problems. And what we mean by implementation, it means transforming the strategy into tangible outputs, into results, into jobs, into products. And how do you create outputs? You need to put something, the input side, who should invest in that process? Is it the government alone? Is it the private sector alone? Or the academia, or the three should work together? We have seen where countries have succeeded. The leather sector has achieved a lot in India with the participation of the government, the private sector, and the academia. They are working together on a day-to-day basis. Academia doing research, passing over the technology to the companies, the government putting in money, the government also being the major buyer of the products that are being produced in the country. Because in many countries, the government is the biggest consumer. But in Africa, we've noticed that there's a tendency to import everything. What we have seen in the leather sector, our experience is that we have a value chain, as I have shown you, but the various components of the value chain are under the mandate of different ministries. I will illustrate in the next slide. If you look at this slide, the pre-slaughter, peri-slaughter, post-slaughter are usually under the Ministry of Agriculture, the Veterinary Department, and other associated departments. The tanning and the manufacturing of leather products are under the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. But in most countries that I've worked in, the industrial strategy or policy is done under the Ministry of Industry. So when it is produced under the Ministry of Industry, it still has components that deals with addressing pre-slaughter, peri-slaughter, and post-slaughter. So if it is designed and launched, who will then support the ministry in implementing these three components? And if we look in many African countries, the ministries are more administrative in nature. Some of them, majority of them, they have limited skills and knowledge in program management or project management, implementing activities to achieve results. So when a strategy is launched here, and there's no clear definition as to how the Ministry of Agriculture will play, the role they will play, or other stakeholders like skills development, technology, quality, and standards, it becomes difficult. So in our history, or in our experience of implementing strategies for the leather industry, after seeing this, we came up with a concept that we called participatory strategy unpacking. You'd notice that strategy formulation, the issue has been used. But even if you look at some reference material by Kaplan, they've noted that most people in universities, they are trained how to design strategies, but they are not trained on how to implement strategies. There's a big gap. So what we have started to experiment is to say, how do we improve strategy implementation, despite the fact that the strategy is led by one ministry? How do we involve all the parties? So we came up with a term that we call unpacking. Unpacking is a term that relates to a concept that has been used in Australia called total government, whereby if they are working on a project, either energy or key players from various segments of government and the private sector, they are brought together to support that cause. And what are the advantages of that process? The unpacking brings the following benefits. It breaks down implementation barriers, like silos. Most ministries, they operate in silos. They have their mission, they have their visions. Some of their missions and visions are actually contradictory. For instance, because of this idea of self-sufficiency, it has been noted that if you generate revenue, you may retain it. So for Ministry of Agriculture, they would prefer once animals are slaughtered, they export the hides, they benefit from export tax or from the export license. But the Ministry of Industry is interested in those hides so that they are processed to bring out quality products. So this unpacking process, we bring together all the stakeholders in a room, lay out the objectives, the sub-objectives of the project, of the strategy, I mean to say. Then through a participatory process, we allocate responsibilities to different ministries, stakeholders, could be Farmers Association, Tanners Association, Manufacturers Association. Because this strategy is not a Ministry of Industry strategy, but it's a strategy. Yes?
I'm going to give you 30 more seconds to wrap up.
Oh, okay. So this element of unpacking gives these players responsibility and accountability, and it becomes a vehicle for implementation. This is an example of allocating responsibilities under each objective, one led by Ministry of Agriculture, the other on industry. Then finally, this kind of arrangement empowers the various stakeholders to lobby resources as a coalition. So if Ministry of Agriculture has a role, Ministry of Industry has a role, Ministry of SMEs, when they go to Parliament, they lobby for resources together to support one strategy. But if they go divided, they go and fight and no one gets the resources. And then the strategy dies from that very day. In many African countries, they don't provide the money to fund strategies. But through this process, we started to see Kenya, Malawi, Ethiopia starting to fund leather strategies, and the industry is actually waking up. Thank you.
Most African and SADC countries, where we tend to import raw materials, but we produce very little in terms of product, and that can be said across many industries. So we'll be moving on to the Q&A session. Thank you for the presentation from all our panelists. Starting off with a question from Rendani Mampiswana, which says, how do we see the role of industry and local technology development protectionism in enabling industrialization? And this question is addressed to all three panelists. So I will pose the question to Nicholas, as you were just talking about localization, and then we'll move on to Dr. Mamadou, and then we'll go to Glen.
Please, Khodani, can you repeat the question a bit?
Okay, How do we see the role of industry and or local technology development protectionism in enabling industrialization?
Okay, thank you so much. This is the issue of protectionism in supporting industrialization is very critical. I'll give you an example of Taiwan. Many years ago, they were trying to develop the television in the glass industry. And this glass was being imported from Japan. But there were local companies that were making glasses for the television. So the local institution, government institute, approached these small companies to say, can you make that glass so that we stop importing it? They say, yes, if we get ABCD. They were given those ABCD. They started to make the glass and they tested the glass. It was performing the same with the one coming from Japan. They asked the company to stop importing from Japan, but it tried the local glass. The company refused. And the government then agreed to frustrate them on importation. They were frustrated and they realized the message and they started to use the local glass. And the industry, the glass industry boomed in Taiwan. So what I'm trying to say is here in Africa, for us to move forward, the element of protectionism, to protect our industry to grow, support them technical wise so that they can produce the same quality with imports is critical. Thank you.
The question, Rendani. I think this is obviously really crucial. Certainly, it's been one of the debates in the renewable energy localization process, where countries have either sought to try and develop, independent of the global value chain, their own capabilities to supply into renewable energy projects. And there are those that have tried to simply attract those big producers in the global value chain already to come and locate in their countries to come and operate. And I think that depending on different contexts, there's some different lessons to be learnt, which relate to the sort of depth of your industrial capabilities and access to kind of competitive supplies. Certainly in South Africa, there was a big push in the renewable energy program to try and get to a lower cost sort of energy supply as quickly as possible. And that was deemed a particular priority, although the program started off at quite higher costs, being very new at the time. And in many countries, they've chosen to not go for lowest cost energy supply in exchange for sort of deeper forms of industrialization. And that's one of the trade-offs one can look at over and above issues of tariffs and protections. So there are a whole range of instruments that can be used to try and A, bring in global suppliers to locate in a country, and B, also try and develop some local capabilities. I think one of the concerns in the South African context is that we kind of assumed that we would easily be able to meet the performance requirements of the global value chain. And our efforts in that regard fell short. And so there was a lot of public support and investment into localized suppliers that weren't already in the industry. And I think that's a big risk to consider. And certainly lots of the experience of other countries like Brazil and others, which suggest that maybe bring in some of these global suppliers and then try and build a supply chain, a local supply chain of local companies that can supply into those first and second tier suppliers, rather than trying to sort of leapfrog into being a global quality supplier right from the start.
In my view, local industry or local technology for the industrialization is very critical for our economy. And nowadays, I think that the thinking should be focused on it, because no country in the world have developed without having a solid private sector. And this have to be grown locally. And I think that this question is very relevant, and I think that most of the thinking should be focused how to have a deep and sound local industry, because the COVID-19 show up how local investment is very important for our countries. And to my thinking, we should think how to collaborate between us as an African to develop value chain, as my president have said. And I think that we should put more focus on this local technology and local industrialization. It is very critical for our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be moving on to questions that have been posed specifically for a certain panelist. So there was a question for Glen from Gina asking for clarity on what you mean by OEM follower sourcing. Does it have any bearing to discuss which talks about SA market being too small?
Yeah, I mean, follower sourcing is really the sort of term that's used where dominant players in global value chains bring some of their suppliers with them when they enter markets. And those follower, so that's considered a sort of follower sourcing strategy. And, you know, really, the size of the market in terms of the volume of demand obviously is significant. But there have been countries that have offered incentives to bring follower sources, even where the local market might not strictly justify that kind of production, because countries want the benefit of local employment and local spending that might come with that. Ideally, those follower sources, the follower suppliers, would want to be able to access export markets, and in order to make their business case kind of work better, and because they know that incentives can be a bit fickle and disappear over time. So the market size issues are really critical, and you know, as it stands at the moment, South Africa's got a significant demand for renewable energy, and particularly wind, committed to in the IRP 2019. And if that was implemented, I think we would, you know, it's quite clear that along with the sort of policy backing from the localization efforts, we would see additional follower sourcing investments. But that scheme itself would benefit from being supplemented by growing demand in the region. So a country like Brazil that has developed some capabilities in the wind energy sector through this follower sourcing investment is also exporting into neighboring markets. And that's been a critical decision for them, for those investors. So I think, you know, that market size issue is really important.
Thank you, Glen. As a follow-up to that, there's a question from Gaylor about what are the avenues to expand beyond the REI-IP program, and how do we deepen regional integration through SAPP?
I was trying to ignore Gaylor's question. So for those I'm no expert on the South African power pool, but it's basically an arrangement that allows us to trade energy across our borders in the region, and to utilize the connecting infrastructure across the grids to be able to enable South African energy to be consumed elsewhere in the region, or for us to use hydro energy here in South Africa that might come in from neighboring countries. And you know, certainly there's been quite a lot of work done some years back to look at using the power pool as a kind of a forum to support renewable energy commitments. For those interested, there's a report that the International Renewable Energy Network ARENA produced in 2013 about this very issue. And I think that's, you know, the SA PP has to be core to thinking about how a renewable energy program develops. But alongside that, there's quite a lot of innovation happening in sort of off-grid and microgrid and schemes that I think ultimately could even challenge the infrastructure that's embedded in the SA power pool. And even since that work that was done by Arena in 2013, where the costs of the different energy sources have really changed, hugely in the sort of almost 10 years, where sort of hydro was seen to be the lowest cost energy, assuming out all the externalities of hydro projects that they have. And wind energy was seen to be very expensive. That's changed. So, that forum is really an asset that could be utilized, I think, is what I want to say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Then we'll be moving on to Dr. Mamadou. There's a question from DJ. Are there any indications of decoupling GDP growth and carbon emissions in any country that was studied?
Thank you, DJ, for this relevant question. Unfortunately, we didn't focus in this kind of decoupling the GDP growth and carbon emission, but this could be can be seen as a limit of the study, but it could be done. I think, yeah. I think that we can do it. It is possible to do it, but we didn't focus particularly in this kind of thing in this study. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mamadou. For Nicholas, there's also a question from Mtokozisi. SA is struggling to compete with China in the clothing, textile, leather, and footwear industry. What are the interventions, in your view, that will need to be in place to ensure competitiveness and growth in the sector in order to be able to compete with China?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think even in athletics, you have to choose your category. Like, for instance, if you're in boxing, if you are above a certain weight, then you become heavyweight. If you are lightweight, you cannot compete with the heavyweights. What I'm trying to say is, as Africa or as South Africa, we need to define our area that we should specialize in. If we look at China, they are very good in every aspect, I would say. But one area that I have seen that Africa can compete is to specialize on school shoes, military boots, all these boots which are used in the industrial area. If we are able to specialize, increase volumes, our unit costs will go down and will compete. The advantage of this segment, again, is that it is a regulated segment. The products have to meet certain regulated specifications of safety. So if we have the regulations on our side, specialize through government procurement, we'll be able to boost our output. So once we specialize on that, and we are able to supply the local and the regional industry, we'll be able to be competitive. The other aspect is to support small-scale SMEs to form clusters. In South Africa, through the DTI and IDC are already supporting some of the clusters. I looked at the numbers maybe a year or so ago, and I've seen a good recovery in footwear production in South Africa as a result of that intervention. So something is happening, but what I've seen is once you specialize, you will give results. Once government supports with the procurement, I've seen an example in Kenya, where in 2013, a lot of companies were about to close, and the government put up a legislation to say 60 to 70% of military or all footwear requirements for government will be procured from local producers. The capacity utilization shot up to 90%, and they've kept jobs, and slowly their efficiency and competitiveness are improving. So these are my inputs. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolette. Before you go, there's a question asking if there's any countries that are currently implementing the strategy that you discussed.
Yeah, there are approximately 10 countries: Ethiopia, Uganda, Burundi, Zimbabwe, Eswatini. There are about 10 countries. If you go on the Africa Leather Products Institute website, the strategies are listed. But the critical thing, in my view, is not the paper document, but it is the process of implementation that requires continuous engagement, reviewing outputs, reviewing activities, finding partners, and continuously supporting them. In my view, we will never be able to industrialize in Africa if we think it will happen automatically. It can never happen automatically. See what has happened to South African motor industry. It may have its own challenges, but it is where it is today because there's been tremendous support through IDC to reach that level. I think it's even exporting to Australia and other countries. So it is through government working in partnership with the private sector that we can achieve results. Ethiopia is also coming up through that kind of support approach. It's never automatic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. I'm going to Ronett Atukunda, sorry. He wants to make a brief comment on the protectionism and the industrialization that we started discussing initially.
Thank you very much. Apologies, I cannot share my video. It will greatly affect the internet stability. What I wanted to add on to what other panelists had said is it's a catch-22 about protectionism and industrialization, especially in RECs. Yes, like Nicholas said, we need to find creative ways of protecting our local technologies. But from the experience of Uganda, we have seen that once you do this to the detriment of imports, say, from the region, the other countries within the REC will retaliate. They retaliate and they stop imports. For example, like he's used glass, Kenya will retaliate on sugar, to retaliate on milk, and just block your exports to Kenya. So there has to be a balance, a very delicate balance on how you do that. Uganda had done that with a policy called Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. Kenya now has Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. So you will find that the purposes of the REC will be greatly affected. So it really, one, there is no way, there's no way about it. We must find ways of protecting our local industry that they can grow. But as we do this, we must keep the bigger picture of the REC and the ideals of the REC and the agreements that are existent, that you do not find that in trying to protect the industries, you're losing out even more from retaliation from other countries in the REC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ronett, for that comment. So I'll be going back to Glen. There's a question from DJ, whether there's been any successful efforts at coordinating renewable energy deployment master plan in the SADC region and the regional African bloc, and if there's been any cooperation or collaboration on inter-country energy planning in Africa. And what are, it's a long question, and what are the barriers?
Okay, so I mean, we're still looking at some of these issues and learning a bit about them, but I mean, certainly if you scan the policy field across the continent and all the institutions that are responsible for developing policies, whether it be in the regional communities or the AU or the African Development Bank, a host of others from outside the continent that like to poke their noses into what's going on, have been hosting forums and promoting kind of renewable energy take-up across the continent. And I think that there are definitely countries that have made bigger strides towards this in real development terms, and there are a handful that are really starting on this journey in quite significant ways. For instance, I mentioned Ethiopia, with some of the mature markets like Morocco or, and South Africa. And if you look across these different institutions, they are all producing reports about energy reforms, about ways of encouraging renewable energy take up, the imperative to do that, to be able to deliver energy to the unserved markets, unserved people across the continent. In practical terms, I think they've yet to necessarily show a kind of capability to really engage in a kind of detailed joint planning and delivery that might be there. Although there are examples, especially with hydro schemes and the South African Power Pool as examples. Those schemes aren't necessarily without controversy. I mean, if you talk to Ugandans and Kenyans about hydropower supplies, there's some big concerns about the history of those schemes and cost sharing and the like. But we have a track record of some actual substantial investment collaboration across regions. So that's a really good place to start from, but there's more work to be done.
Thank you, Glenn. We have another question for Dr. Mamadou. Your results show that both energy and industrial activity increase CO2 emissions while your interaction term is barely significant. Could you clarify the motivation for your policy recommendation for industrialization?
Thank you, LPC, for this relevant question. As you say, we have recommend to SADC country members to continue the process of industrialization. That is true, and we think that this have to be a policy focus, because we have mentioned that industrialization have many benefits for sustainable development goal, to attain sustainable development goals. However, in our result, you are right. We find that the interaction term is negative, and this is very interesting for our result, and that's why we provide this kind of recommendation, because the negative term, the negative sign of the interaction variable mean that by the intensity of the energy intensity can dampen the effect of industrialization on dioxide carbon. That's why we think that industrialization should be promoted, because how this can be done by using energy efficiently, and this can reduce the negative effect of industrialization on carbon dioxide emission. That's why we think that by using the efficient use of energy, this can dampen the negative effect of industrialization on CO2. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mamadou. And then the last question for the day comes from Matliori. Can we lessen the retaliation through Africa Free Trade Agreement and collaboration, make these value chains as an African approach to industrialization in Africa? This question is open to any panelist who wants to take it.
Hello, let me try.
Yeah, hello? Oh, okay.
Okay, I think, sorry. I think this is a very good question. And why do we find ourselves in this predicament? We find ourselves in the predicament of competition because if we look at the trade negotiation process, in many countries it was not informed but by the situation on the ground in terms of what they offer or what they want to trade. when they liberalize or when they become part of the REC. That's why today, when you look at the numbers, tariffs have been reduced to zero, intra-trade, but the intra-trade is not peaking because there's nothing to trade. So in real terms, when you look at the situation on the ground, there isn't much competition, but the competition is created because we have no numbers to support what we can produce and what we cannot produce. Very few countries in all these RECs carry out industrial centers of production. I think maybe South Africa, Zimbabwe, I don't know, maybe the last they did in 2000. Most countries have said for production data, there's no production data. And they say we are retaliating on the basis of just political retaliation. So when you look at, for example, the footwear industry, the example I was giving you, the demand for footwear in the 3 RECs is in excess of, is closer or above 1 billion pairs. But combined output of the 27 countries in the tripartite is less than 400 million. So technically, there's no competition. The competition is coming from outside. But because we don't have numbers, we pushed our tariffs to zero for no apparent reason. We're not sure. Of course, we are there now. The question is, how can we now commit to work together? Like, for instance, if you look at Botswana and South Africa, Botswana, they produce very big hides, which are also feeding into the leather industry in South Africa, especially for the automotive industry. But the issue is to say, if they are being turned in South Africa, how can Botswana benefit from that process? This is the question. If we decide today to say, okay, let us make South Africa the hub of making motor vehicles for the region, so that other countries will not start and produce 2 vehicles per month. How can we support that process? And how can that support process benefit other countries? So they need to sit down to say, if we want to industrialize as a region, and you remember the old SADC, which was called Southern Africa Coordination Conference, it had a thematic focus to say, country X, you focus on energy. Country Y on this, country Y on the production side, not on the lowering of tariffs. So I think we can still work together if we say, yes, we have lowered to zero, but what should we do? I can tell you the biggest debate that has not moved within the tripartite is to say, how do we industrialize? And people have no numbers to support their positions. It's only arguments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nicholas. We've come to the end of our session. Thank you to all our panelists and to all the participants for all the mind-boggling questions. The next session will be starting at 11:30. If you are interested in joining the next session, you can take a 5 minutes breather. You don't have to log on. You can stay on online and just maybe go make yourself a cup of tea, and then we will resume at 11:30. Thank you, guys.